All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our new week of our new normal. We are on, I think, week 13, but they're all kind of blending together at this point. So, but we are this week we're going to go over chapter 12. You will notice, obviously, that I have skipped chapter 13 in the book. And the reason, not chapter 13, but chapter 11 in the book. And the reason for that is because chapter 11 and chapter 10 are very, very similar. Chapter 10 was discussing student motivation. Chapter 11 was promoting student motivation. So I realized last semester whenever I did this, whenever I sort of did this sequence of instruction and this, and my graduate class, that really the information learned in chapter 11 was very, very similar to chapter 10. So we're going to go over chapter 12 because we only have a few weeks left of class. And so yeah, I think that is that is it for today. I hope everybody's doing okay. I hope everybody's staying safe. It is kind of a crazy world these last few weeks, but if you have any questions or concerns, or if I can help in any way, please let me know. And then as far as our debate topic is concerned this week, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna do the same as we did last. I gave you the debate topic last week, so if you're one of those 4 individuals, then you already have your debate topic. You already have your debate uh, invitation. I already sent it to you. I sent it to you last week. That is, and then I edited it um, for this upcoming Friday, which would be what, the 17th? Yeah, I believe so. And so, yeah, so you already have your debate topic. And one thing I wanted to make sure is known is, because I did cancel a few of the assignments, or I made them extra credit. And that includes the classroom management presentation. The presentation is still canceled, right? You're not going to be expected to do that, but I am expecting you to write the paper. Okay, so for those of you that thought that the paper was canceled, the paper was no longer a requirement, I haven't heard anybody say that, but I just want to make sure that it is clear, because we are discussing classroom management today, and so understanding that that paper is, I still want you to go and write a paper about classroom management. The same paper that I expected you to write before, I want you to write now. The one thing that I will say is, sort of the one leeway that I'll give, is that before it was a matter of I wanted you to go out and sort of pick a group on a certain day, or presentation day on a certain week or whatever it might be, and then based on what group topic you had, I wanted you to write a paper on that topic. But I'm going to open it up to where you can write it about you can choose whichever preferred model you would like to from the book. So if you are a lover of positive behavior intervention supports, you can write your paper on that. If you really don't know and you just want to sort of flip through the pages and stick your finger down on a random page, and that's what you're going to write about, go for it. But I do want you to write a paper for it for this class. And yeah, other than that, I think that we are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and get in with the presentation. You might actually notice a little bit of a difference in my presentation style this week versus a few weeks ago. I've actually started recording sort of the content, the meat of the presentations before I record this part, so that I can try to be as quick. So I tend to be a little long-winded. Like right now, I'm being long-winded. I'm going to try and cut that down as much as possible to try to keep my videos as short as possible. So otherwise, have a great week and enjoy the video. All right, have a good week, everybody. Okay, so today we're going to be discussing classroom management, and ultimately what classroom management really refers to is just how your classroom looks when it comes to certain behaviors, just how orderly your class looks, how efficient, you know, are there behaviors that are essentially preventing students from learning? Is your space, is your classroom an environment that really does encourage sort of a positive space, and which in turn then allows for learning? And so, you know, when you walk into a classroom, what you want to see is you want to see several students, hopefully all students, that are able to practice some level of self-regulation. We'll discuss self-regulation here in a little bit, and then academic learning, and then you would like to, at some point, include some level of social-emotional development. And I know that in the past, working with teachers, there's been some level of resistance to the idea of them supporting the social emotional development of students. But what I always encourage them to think about is that ultimately, whenever you are allowing them to have some level of group work, some level of peer-to-peer interaction, that is encouraging social development, right? That is encouraging them to learn what is appropriate in the classroom as far as sort of peer-to-peer interactions. That is, what is appropriate for a sort of a classroom academic space where students are expected to be able to interact appropriately, to talk, to work together, and to do all that in a way that is appropriate in the classroom. That is social development. And if it is a situation where this can help them be better students, which will make them therefore more comfortable in their academic setting, that's emotional development too. So the social emotional development is, it can sound scary or sound intimidating for a lot of teachers and teachers I've worked with in the past because of the fact that, the resistance that I've always heard, that I've always gotten pushed onto me, or not pushed onto me, but told to me, was that essentially I didn't go to school, quote unquote I did, but the teacher says, I didn't go to school to become a counselor. I didn't go to school to become a psychologist. I didn't go to school to be anything but a teacher. And there's obviously a lot of different responses with sort of parts to a response to that. And one of the big ones is the fact that it is 2020 and our students are, our schools are requiring us to provide more assistance than just, y equals mx plus b, right? Or teaching about the Civil War. And the important context that I feel like it needs to be really encouraged here is the understanding that, again, going back to what I was just saying a minute ago, that teaching students is more effective whenever they feel safe, whenever they feel like their opinion is valued, whenever they're given some level of power over their own instruction. All of these things encourage students to feel more comfortable and to feel more empowered to learn. And so ultimately, it is in your best interest to encourage some level of social emotional development in your classroom, but also, if there is ever a concern, if there's ever an issue, there's probably, depending on the campus or the district that you work in, there's probably somebody on that campus or in that district that is willing to help you sort of navigate this issue, right? So whenever I was working as a school psychologist in high schools, I would regularly do, excuse me, social emotional development in the classrooms. I would regularly do social skills in the classrooms. I would observe. I would do whatever I can to help the teacher in the classroom. And a big reason for that is that ultimately you're very busy people. Teachers are very, very busy people, and it is not always possible for you to, sort of make the time. And even if it is, it's something that I really enjoy doing, so I never mind helping. But it's always sort of in the best interest of the teacher and the students to have the teacher sort of take the reins on that part of their lesson planning. And so I've always tried to, as much as possible, encourage teachers to use different social skills strategies, and also understand that there's already social emotional development taking place in their classroom as it is, right? Whether or not it is explicit or implicit, there is still some level of social emotional development happening while you're teaching. And really it could be just as easy as simply, changing the words that are coming out of our mouths, or being a little more strategic about what we're saying, and that can absolutely encourage a much different social emotional context than what you were having in the past. So, ultimately, before you get overwhelmed with the idea of being sort of a social emotional development teacher or social emotional support system, just understand how easy it is, and also how beneficial it is for you and your students in the classroom. Okay. So developing self-regulation. So really, self-regulation is exactly what it sounds like. It is the ability to essentially, it is the ability, if we're looking at a student, to come into your room, to not walk into your room screaming, hollering, throwing stuff around the classroom, but I'm going to walk in the room, and I'm going to walk directly toward my seat, or maybe I'm going to walk to the teacher's desk and ask the teacher a question, or ultimately I am exhibiting some level of self-regulation to where I am only exhibiting behaviors that I know are appropriate in this classroom, right? So I'm going to walk to my desk, I'm going to pull out my notebook, I'm going to, maybe I'll talk to my friends for a little bit, but it is within sort of an appropriate context, right? And so I'm not necessarily being really loud, really disruptive. I'm not hitting, I am not punching my friends. I am, the topic that we're discussing is not, it's not inappropriate for the classroom. It is not sort of obscene or just sort of vulgar, whatever the rules whatever the system might be in your room, will require some level of self-regulation, right? So even this right here, this video context that we are in right now, requires some level of self-regulation if you are doing this sort of appropriately, because this is a video on YouTube, right? And it could be very, very easy for you to play through this and turn on captions and completely ignore me and be watching, a YouTube video on your phone or whatever it might be. But there is some level of self-regulation that you have hopefully developed at this point in time, and that really begins very early on, right? So kindergarten teachers, whenever they are working with students that are for the first time coming into their class, they are having to teach essentially how to be a student, right? Because they are coming in from a system where they're coming in from maybe a daycare, or maybe they've been sitting at home for the last few years, being sort of one-on-one with a parent, depending on what their situation was before they got to kindergarten. And now they're in, I'm a kindergarten teacher, now they're in my classroom, and I need to figure out how to help them become better students and become more well-regulated students, right? So understanding that when we want to answer a question, or we want to ask a question, we raise our hand. When we want to go use the potty, we ask for permission. When we want to really do anything, we ask for permission. We are essentially, the moment that we enter into a school system, we are learning how to be a student. We are learning self-regulation skills, right? So my son is 3 years old, and he is a preschooler at Little Gorillas here in Pittsburgh, which is on campus. And he is, one of the reasons that he is in there is because, obviously, for the social development, but also so that whenever he does, in a few years, become a student at the local elementary school, George Nettles Elementary, then he will be sort of more well acquainted with what it is like to be a student. And I will actually say that there is some level of credence there, or kind of credibility, because of the fact that, so I do reading I used to do reading back when George Nettles was still open. I would read to second graders once a week on Tuesdays. And actually, the last few times I started to take my son, and it was amazing where he had no problem whatsoever understanding that in this context, I am supposed to sit down, and I'm supposed to listen to this person read. And laughing is okay, and kind of just enjoying the reading is okay. But what is not okay is, turning to his neighbor and hitting his neighbor. What is not okay is turning to his neighbor and talking to his neighbor. There are all these things that are not okay. They're sort of not acceptable in this framework. Where honestly, if we read a story here, I'm actually in his room right now because that's my makeshift office. When we do story time at night before bedtime, we have established a context where he's allowed to kind of be goofy. He's allowed to kind of be silly. And so ultimately, again, just going back to the fact that students are learning how to regulate themselves as soon as they walk into a classroom setting, because we have to do that. We have to establish essentially good social norms in order to make a classroom function appropriately. And so all of these components here, the self-motivation, delayed gratification, impulse control, those all go into self-regulation. And some really good, if you're looking at self-regulation strategies, one of the things is self-monitoring interventions can be very effective. So self-monitoring is essentially just as it sounds, is having a student become aware of their own behaviors, and their own thoughts, and their own actions, and then taking note of that, right? And so one of the things you can do is, if you are, and I've seen this work for some elementary students with some adaptation, but essentially you can figure out a system or some scenario where a student is struggling in the classroom. They're not exhibiting the behaviors you want them to exhibit, and so you are going to meet with them in class beforehand, before the sort of class starts, and you will establish what norms you expect to see from that student, what behaviors you expect to see from that student, and you will expect those, and then you will teach those behaviors to that student so that he or she knows what they're supposed to do. And then every 5 minutes or so, whatever is appropriate for your classroom, you will in some way inform them of the time, right? So here's a 5 minute marker, and then you will, at that 5 minute marker, you, student, need to write down what you were doing. What is the behavior that you're doing? Or what I've also seen is, we print sort of this little piece of paper. We can laminate it, give the kid a vis-a-vis marker, and at the top of the page say, here is your behavior, spelled out, very, very explicit. And we start a timer, and 5 minutes progresses, and we ring a bell, or we will say Johnny. Or I've even seen some teachers have students wear like a beep, sort of a beep track, where it's a CD player, and they wear one single earbud where there's literally nothing being played at all, except every 5 minutes they just hear a little beep, and then at that 5 minutes the student knows to, okay, what are my behaviors like, and then they will take the vis-a-vis marker and they will check. Okay, so at the 9:25 mark, I was sitting in my seat with my hands at an appropriate spot on the desk, and I was, essentially my behaviors were appropriate to the lesson. Now you're going to want the behaviors to be very objective and very explicit, and so this is an area where if you are not very comfortable doing that, it'd be beneficial for you to get a behavior management individual in your classroom, maybe a school psychologist. I can't speak high enough of our skill level. A school psychologist, a behavior therapist, whatever it might be in your campus, on your campus or in your district. Get them to come in your classroom and really help you operationalize that definition so that it's very, very explicit, so that the student really knows exactly what behaviors you want them to see, or that you want them to be checking on every few minutes. And so, and then, they just check. They're checking every time that they are exhibiting appropriate behaviors for your classroom. They check the little box, and then if they get you're going to start off very high because behavior management, you want to start off very high, or you want to set a very frequent reinforcement schedule. So if they are exhibiting the behaviors 50% of the time, then they get some reward. Then, as they get better, 60% of the time, they get a reward. And so that is a way to teach self-regulation. Very, very simple way to teach self-regulation that requires very little honestly, financial input on anybody's part, okay? So creating positive climate can be a situation where, can really help the situation where students respond better when they are in a climate that is encouraging to their learning environment, to their learning abilities. It is not going to sort of create tensions between students. It is not going to create sort of these social comparisons that we sometimes create in schools. I know that some of that can be it can be automatic. Students, at least from my, speaking of my own personal situation, I was incredibly competitive whenever I was in school, and I wanted to be, I had sort of the list of students that I wanted to, I wanted to do better on the test than them, right? And they, it was likewise, right? So most students will have some level of social comparison going on, but it's important that you don't create an environment where that is the norm, okay? And so then encouraging the students to also understand to know you as a teacher and for you to know them as a human being. Really just creating an environment where students walk in and they feel like they are valued and they feel like they are here to learn. And again, this is one of those ones that I've had some, I've actually had less pushback on this from like teachers than I have from honestly, people that are not teachers. People that are teachers whenever I have sort of introduced this, if there has been any resistance, it has gone away very quickly because they realize, oh wow, these students really did respond better when they weren't being sort of pitted against each other, or they really did respond better whenever I wasn't calling them out, or whenever I was encouraging a more socially positive environment. But every once in a while you'll hear some like parents or some, I had a registrar at a high school that I used to work at that was just, she would just go off on any given day about sort of these safe spaces and this need to have positive climate and how stupid it is. But really the fact of the matter is that research is very, very clear that, and honestly, we don't even necessarily need research to validate this. We can all understand in our own context. If I were to come onto this video and, even in this video context, if I were to do something that made you feel uncomfortable, you would stop listening. You would stop listening to me, right? And if that has happened, I'm not saying that it hasn't happened. It could have possibly happened. I try to be very strategic, but if it has happened, please let me know. If you haven't been watching my videos for the last few weeks because I make you uncomfortable, please email me. But ultimately, it is one of those things where we all know that we want that the environment that we're in we feel more effective in the environment, and we feel more welcomed in the environment if it is a safer, more positive space, right? If you go to work and it's in a positive environment. Last year I worked at a school district that I absolutely hated. It was not a positive environment. It was not it was, they were trying to work on the safety issue, just of staff feeling welcomed and staff not feeling like they were feel like they were sort of inferior or insufficient or whatever it might be. But ultimately, it was a terrible district to work for, and that was the longest 190. My contract was for 195 days, and it was the longest 195 days of my life. It was such a slog. And I was so thankful to get out of that district. And so maybe some of you have a similar situation, but ultimately, it doesn't necessarily. We all want a place to feel safe. We all want to feel a place where we can feel like we are valued, like we are needed, like we are important. So why should we expect it to be any different for students, right? I mean, you know, so I think that if you ever receive any resistance to this idea, it's really important to just look at it from a different perspective and help teachers or help individuals look at it, or parents or whoever it might be, look at it from a different perspective, right? Because we live in a world today where we are very ideologically divided, and we can it is very easy for us to sort of live in a vacuum where all we hear is that this is ridiculous. This idea of needing safe spaces is ridiculous, and even that's political, which is insane to me. Excuse me. I need some water. Excuse me. All right. So in instructional planning, you're going to want to be clear about your learning goals. Again, if students are aware, sort of going back to the behavior management piece, the behavioral strategies that we learned about a few weeks ago, if you are clear about your objectives, if you are clear about what you want your students to learn, then they're more likely to learn it. And also, you're going to want to provide examples of what you want, and also examples of what you don't want. So, and that is absolutely something that I can do better about in the future. So one of the things that I sent out in the beginning of the semester was a video of exactly what I want as far as my paper is concerned. But as with anybody, as with any teacher out there, I am constantly learning. I'm constantly trying to do better about about how I do this job. And so for future semesters, I'm going to include a paper. I'm going to include in that video also sort of what I don't want, what I do not. If your paper looks like this, then I do not. Then please fix it, right? And then, I had a teacher a few years ago that did a really good job of doing this. That he would literally stand at his door. He was a Spanish teacher, and honestly, a good friend of mine today. He would stand at his door, and he would require students to have some task. There was some task that they were required to do, and it would start off at the beginning of the year of just say good morning in Spanish, buenos dias, and then by the end of the school year, they were expected to have a much longer list of sort of interactions with him as far as being in Spanish, and that was always really cool because he really set the tone from the moment you walk to my door that you are being expected to learn. Now the difficult part there is that if you are he has a classroom of 30 students. If you are, student number one, you've entered the classroom, an issue that he did have very quickly was that student 1 through 29 were now sitting at their desk waiting for student 30 to finish whatever introduction that they were having to give. And so I think that, just making sure that really that we understand the value of every minute in the school. A lot of teachers, will use bell ringers where they, the example that immediately pops to my mind, obviously we have better technology these days, but whenever I was in school, they had the projectors where they had the little clear sheet they put on the projector. Most of you probably know what I'm talking about, I'm assuming. And there'd be some math problems, some history questions, some thought piece up there, and then we were required to do something, right? So those are good ways of making sure that from the moment that I walk in the door, or the moment that I walk into Mr. or Mrs. such and such's class, then I am engaged in instruction, right? And it also helps with this next point of establishing routines, right? So if I know that every single day that I'm in this classroom at the, bell has rung plus 5 minutes, so 5 minutes after the bell is rung, then I will be expected to produce some level of knowledge or some permanent product of what I've done so far. Then I'm more likely to sit down, engage in that bell ringer, try to get it done, and and try to finish the assignment, and then be able to present the level of knowledge or level of understanding that I have to my teacher at the 5 or 10 minute mark. And then the benefit of that is that that will also help with sort of formative assessments, where you can understand what the students are aware of, what they know in advance, and then they can take that knowledge, or you can take that knowledge and compare that to the end of class or the next day or whatever it might be. So it helps with your formative assessment and understanding where your students are in the lesson. And then you're going to want to make transitions quick and seamless. This can be very, very difficult, especially at the elementary level. Whenever I was working as an RTI specialist in Compton, one of our big jobs was to train teachers on how to implement a reading differentiation program. It was called Peer Assisted Learning Strategies, PALS for short, out of Vanderbilt University, and essentially what it does is it pairs students in a pairwise method, and they are then they go through some reading program, and it's a very, very cool program. It does benefit students quite a bit, but one of the difficult parts, and one of the parts that we really had to work on with teachers, was understanding the importance of transitions. And the reason for that is because in PALS, if you have a class of 25 second grade students, and they're sort of sitting in a big kind of square shape, or maybe you have them in sort of groups of 4 or whatever it might be, whatever your room looks like, it is probable that the pairs that you establish with your in PALS will not be sort of perfectly aligned with this, right? So you might have a situation where you have put all your students, on day 1, you put all your students in the room, and I can actually speak from experience here. We had teachers that would put all our students in the room, and say a group of 4, in groups of 4. And so then we did the reading screener in end of August, middle of September, roughly on that timeline, and then we would implement PALS. And so then we would take the reading screener, the reading assessment that we did, and then we would pair students up based on skill level, and it never matched the sort of the already established seating chart in the classroom. And so what we had to do then was make sure that students knew very quickly, okay, so it is time for PALS, everybody stand up, or and go to sort of your designated spot. One individual from each pair, go and get your PALS materials and come back to the spot that you're supposed to, so that you only have 12 students going and getting a folder versus 25 students going and getting a folder. Because whenever you have 25 second graders going into a specific spot, and only 12 of them are going to be able to grab anything, then it can become mayhem. And honestly, in an elementary school classroom, it can become mayhem very, very quickly, very, very easily. And that isn't necessarily just true for elementary school. It's true really for everybody. But ultimately, you want to essentially establish very, very clear goals and directives, and with the hope of making transitions more seamless. And one of the things that we ended up doing for most of our teachers was we actually just ended up, so on day 1 they had a seating chart, and honestly on day 30 they had a different seating chart, because we would implement PALS and we'd find that Johnny over here and Susie over here, that were in completely different parts of the classroom, were now partners. And so now instead we would just move Johnny and Susie into one spot, or two different seats next to each other, and that way that We can say, okay, it's PALS time. We'll pair leaders, go and get your PALS materials. So really what you had is you just had 12 students standing up, going, getting their materials, and then coming back and sitting down and getting to work. And then involving all students in your lessons and making sure that they have some level of interaction and some level of power over what they're learning, right? So elementary considerations, you are going to want to establish very, very clear rules in your classroom, and you're going to want to, some of the most effective kindergarten teachers that I've ever come across. I always think about Clark County School District in Las Vegas, Nevada. The best kindergarten teacher that I ever came across was an absolute drill instructor. And she was fantastic, but she was no nonsense, and she had very, very clear rules, and she was very, very consistent. And it was obviously very, very difficult for her because it required a lot of effort on her part. But you're going to want to establish very clear rules, and you're going to want to, as much as possible, use rules that encourage behaviors that conflict with the behaviors you don't want to see. And the reason that I'm framing it from that perspective is because it's important that we establish rules of what we want to see and not rules of what we don't want to see. Because if I have a rule of I want you to come into the room and sit down in your seat and begin working on the bell ringer, that is more can be more easily implemented for the student than, well, I should say without question, than if I have a rule of don't be out of your seat, don't enter the room screaming. And the reason that I'm saying that is because if you have essentially told a student one single behavior that you don't want them to do, if you are implementing a behavioral strategy that encourages students to and tells them the behaviors you do want to see, then they know, okay, this is what they want. This is what Mr. Lloyd wants to see. This is the behavior that they want. He wants me to implement, or he wants me to execute once I go in the room, and that's what you want. You want a student to be able to say, this is what they want me to see. This is what they want me to do. Versus if I just have a few rules of saying, don't do this, don't do this. I used to, honestly, whenever I was in school, I used to pick at this. I used to absolutely take advantage of this from my teachers. Most teachers that that were in the schools whenever I was in school had a lot of do not. There was a lot of do not in the rules whenever I was a kid, and honestly, there's a lot of leeway. Do not scream out in the classroom. I can speak very, very loudly, but I'm not screaming. This is your definition of screaming, but it's not my definition of screaming. And that's, you're not being very objective. And so I guess even back then, I was sort of picking up the subjectivity of these different rules that we establish. But you're going to want to make sure that your rules are objective. You're going to want to make sure that they are telling a student, I want to see this. I want to see this behavior. Because if your rules are, do not get out of your seat for any reason, then the immediate response from some students is going to be, well, what if I need a tissue? What if I need to sharpen my pencil? What if I need to use the bathroom? What if I need, and if you've been in the classroom for any length of time, you've probably experienced that, you've probably seen that, and you probably, felt how frustrating it can be. But just making sure that students know what they are expected to do. And then also, and this doesn't just apply for elementary classrooms, but just personalize your classroom. Make it clear that you are happy to be there, that you are a human being, that you have a personality. Make it clear that you are there to help them learn. And honestly, one of the things that I actually had a student who gave me an interesting perspective last year was, he had an issue with a teacher who didn't have any personal belongings up, and it was sort of there was a misunderstanding between the teacher, where the teacher it was very clearly, this is not my family. These are my students. These are not my kids. These are the students that I teach, and really my personal life is separate. And this was a school district that had a very high turnover rate, and so it made the students a little uncomfortable that maybe this teacher was sort of, on her way out whenever she got a better offer, or whenever she was able to sort of leave, she would do so. And so just making sure your classroom is showing your own personality. Obviously, that goes to, you want it to be appropriate, you want it to be sort of professional, and you also don't want to sort of encourage students to know too much about you, but you just want them to understand that you're a human being, that you have a personality. So first day of school, obviously, the moment they walk in the classroom, it is very, very important. You are establishing a trend for the entire year. And if you are not necessarily encouraging, but not discouraging a situation where you have a lot of students up screaming or being very rowdy or raucous or whatever it might be, if this room is not a room that's going to encourage a whole lot of learning, then it can be a very, very long year for you, right? So I've had situations where not myself, because I'm not an administrator, but I've heard the phone calls before of a parent who a student got an impression from day one that this particular room was not going to be successful for them. So they then went out and they told their parent, and then the parent came to the school and demanded a different teacher, or they demanded they demanded a meeting with the teacher, whatever it might be. And so it just made the teacher's life more difficult by sort of establishing what was interpreted as a more loose, sort of not very encouraging of learning environment, if you will. And so, it's going to be important for the first day of class to really establish the expectations for your classroom. That's all I'm going to say there. All right. So within your classroom, as I mentioned before, you're going to want a set of rules that are telling students what you want them to do, as opposed to what you do not want them to do. And again, the reason is because you want them to know, I want Johnny or Susie or whoever to know the moment they walk in the classroom that this is what I want to see, and that these are the behaviors that are expected. And also, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, with any rule setting process, you're going to want to encourage student feedback. You're going to want to understand, you're going to want to sort of get their opinion on what makes a classroom a valuable environment, and also a good learning environment for all your students. And then if you have, if there is a rule that you have and is very important to you, today has been my son's day of just going off. And if you have a rule that is very, very important to you, and you want to make sure that that particular rule is implemented, then explain your rationale. You might be one of those teachers that thinks, well, the students don't need my rationale. Well, it wouldn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt to just walk in and explain to them, this is what I want to see, and this is why I want to see it, right? And then using concrete examples. Whenever you're implementing sort of a positive behavior model, so a PBIS model, one of the things that they are going to encourage, that we always encourage, is to you can make videos, you can do it however you want to do it. You can do your own acting as a teacher, or whatever it might be. But whenever I was working in the high school in Vacaville, California, we would have videos of, okay, you have to go upstairs to your classroom. This is what we want to see, and it was sort of this orderly, using the right side of the staircase to go up, and then the left side of the staircase to go down, and then this is an example of what we don't want to see. And it was just sort of, it wasn't like utter mayhem, but it was students trying to like push through, and it was students, going up on the left side and down on the right side, and some students were trying to use the up, the right side for up, and some students were trying to use the upside for, or the left side for up, and so it created sort of this havoc in the hallways. So just showing them the behaviors that you want to see, and then the behaviors that you don't want to see, and then really sticking to the rules and encouraging rule following until they become automatic. Until the students are just following them without even necessarily realizing that they're following them. And if you are having an issue of students sort of following them for a while, and then at a certain point they forget, and then the unacceptable behaviors start to increase, then all you need to do is simply reteach that behavior, reteach the expectations that you have for your classroom. So it can be very, very simple. Communicating with parents. This is a huge one, and one that I've had to mediate meetings between parents and teachers before, because certain groups of parents want a lot of feedback, right? And that can become overwhelming, it can become frustrating, it can become a whole lot of things. But ultimately, I have heard parents on every side of the spectrum, no matter whether it's racial or ethnicity, whether it is socioeconomic status, no matter what the parent looks like or what house they live in or whatever it might look like, everybody wants communication from the school before the student is getting in trouble. One of the things I've had so many parents get frustrated about is teacher A never ever calls home, never sends an email home, never sends any kind of update home until student is getting suspended. And it can be really, really frustrating, and I absolutely have to sympathize with the parents here, where if they come into this meeting with this teacher, and teacher says, well, little Johnny has been doing this certain behavior for weeks now, and then the parent says, well, why haven't I been contacted? Why hasn't anybody let me know? Why is the first time that I'm hearing that my son is doing something bad been when they are suspended from school for 3 days? And so really you're going to want to encourage some level of communication with your parents. And it can be as simple as, honestly, my kid's preschool sends out sort of a bulk newsletter that has very little, sort of useful information as far as my son, directly tied to my son, but it just gives us some level of communication with the teacher. It encourages us to know that communication with the teacher is okay, is appropriate. And also, when there has been issues, the teachers let us know about it that day, right? So just understanding that parents don't want to be taken by surprise. And in a situation where they are having to now take 3 days off of work to essentially stay at home with their kid, that can take them by surprise, and that can be very frustrating for the teachers. I mean, for both, to be honest. It's frustrating for the teachers, but it's also frustrating for the parents, because they feel like they've been sort of blindsided by this issue. And whenever we are working in sort of a parent-teacher conference format, it's important for us to not just come in the meeting and say, well, little Johnny is exhibiting X, Y, and Z, and that's really a problem, and we want that to stop. It is more effective to walk in the room and say, sure they are doing this and this, X, Y, and Z, but we are going to work with little Johnny. We're going to figure out we're going to put this plan in place, and we're going to get those behaviors extinguished down to zero really quickly, so that he can be a more effective learner in my classroom. Okay, so just being solutions focused and making sure that you are encouraging communication with the parent. And honestly, I can't speak for every student in our classrooms, and I know that everybody likes to think that our sort of our world has changed, and sort of the power dynamic with the schools. But I, just sort of anecdotally, I remember my family, I remember my school had no problem calling my mom or my dad on the drop of a hat if there was ever an issue with what I was doing, right? And so I was always freaked out by the fact that my parents would get called. And I have a lot of students that in the past, they don't want mom or dad called because if mom or dad has to take time off of work to come and deal with me, that's going to be an issue, right? That's going to really upset my mom or my dad, and that's going to make life more difficult for me as a student. And and so I know it can be more difficult as we sort of are in this world of 30 some odd students in our classes. Hopefully nobody's dealing with that number, but I know in the high schools that can be possible. Maybe even in the elementary schools. But it is a situation where if you are showing uh, a clear team work between mom and dad and school, then it can be more effective, sort of a more effective learning environment for the student. All right. So when the misbehaviors do happen, you're going to want to avoid getting into arguments with the student, which is always important because you're always going to have students that they enjoy the attention that they receive from a teacher arguing with them. And whenever a student walks into the room, there is a clear and present power dynamic. There's a power differential, right? So if you were to walk into a classroom that I am working in, that I am teaching, then the moment you walk in, there is a clear understanding that of the two of us, right, the teacher, the professor, the one at the front of the room has more power than the one that is sitting in the desk in the seat over there, right? And so you're going to, and to a very large extent, that's a good thing, right? Because that allows me as the professor or you as the teacher to have the power and to institute a plan of making this a great space for learning, right? So obviously the assumption is that you don't abuse that power, right, which we all expect you to not do. But the reason that you were given that power is so that because you're the expert and you know how to create a space that will be good for learning for all your students, okay? And so also encouraging the understanding that not every behavior is just due to the student being a bad student, right? So a lot of times, a lot of our students come to school hungry, they come to school tired, they come to school having just had a fight with mom or dad. I remember whenever I was, my senior year of high school, this was the one that comes to my head immediately. I had a huge fight with my dad, and it was not a good situation at all. And I was not the definition of a good student in that current point in time. And then you're going to want to make sure that your consequences for any rules you establish are logical. And if I'm skipping steps here, it's because I'm sitting at 49 minutes and I have not even recorded the intro yet, so I'm trying to speed up a little bit. PBIS is a fantastic method for establishing clear and coherent rules in your classroom. And then it's also a really good method of it lends very well to, or actually it has a system built in, I should say, it's more appropriate to say, that allows for behavioral interventions to be implemented into your classroom, into the school, whatever it might be. And it's a very, very easy token economy system that can be implemented with some level of ease, depending on the buy-in from your teachers. Some avoidable situations, you're going to have situations where students are just absolutely refusing to listen. They are absolutely refusing to stay safe. They are going to, and they are presenting in a way that could possibly lead to danger for other students in your classroom. In those situations, do not try and argue with the student. Do not try and fight with the student. Do not encourage Johnny over there to argue with the student. Do not encourage any interaction with the student whatsoever. Very calmly, simply just stand up, get all your students out of the classroom, and leave that student in the classroom. Okay? Say, just I want everybody in this room to stand up and go to the library. Very, very simple. I have seen it done, and the reason that you want to do this is because you don't want any students to get hurt. If you have a student that is about to throw a table, you don't want a student to throw a table at another student. You don't want to put your other 29 students in a situation where they are potentially going to be hurt. And so you just get them out of the room and then call the SRO or call security or whoever you have on campus. I feel like most schools these days have SROs. It's been a long time since I was on a campus that didn't have some level of SRO. Man, my wife deserves an award after all this. It's not fun out there. Anyways, so if fighting is happening, do not try to break it up. Again, last thing you need is for you yourself to get punched in the face. If you're one of those teachers that you feel like you can do that and do it effectively, don't. Right? The reason is because it can cause a real issue for the school. It can cause a real issue for the district. Even if you are like, well, I'm I'm 6'2", who know, I don't know how much I weigh, but I'm 6'2", and I'm a big dude, and I have a beard, and I'm able to, I can easily pull some little 15-year-old kid off another 15-year-old kid. That's easy. Yes, physically I could probably do that, but physically I could possibly also hurt a student, right? So in the process of sort of pulling another student off of the other student, I could potentially hurt somebody. I could potentially have touched a student who has a very litigious mom or dad who doesn't want their student touched in a way that that removes a student from the situation. And you could view it as, well, I'm encouraging safety. I am encouraging a student to not get in a fight. I am discouraging this altercation. But it could be viewed by the teacher as, or by the parent as, you have restrained my kid. You have put them in a situation where they no longer feel safe. You could be creating more issues than you're solving by simply calling administration or by calling an SRO and just saying, hey, we have a fight. I've removed all the students from the classroom. Please come in here and deal with these two students. And let an SRO do it, right? They're usually trained in some kind of restraint procedure, whether it's CPI or there's another one that I'm blanking on. There's another acronym for it, but CPI is one of the big ones in the schools. But yeah, so that's another important part here. And then bullying. So that's going to be our discussion for today is bullying, and I just want to know what your takes on the bullying, the momentum, the bullying movement, what your opinion on that is, as far as is bullying truly worse today than it was a few years ago, and understand, again, this is your opinion, right? This is an opportunity for you to give your own opinion, okay? And honestly, if I'm being pretty honest, what I find is that there is usually some level of age factor that goes into play here, right? So the people that I run into that are in their older years, they tend to be from an era where there were not cell phones, there wasn't social media constantly in kids' arena, so their awareness, and so they sometimes, oftentimes will take the stance of, well, this is, it's no worse today than it was back whenever I was a kid. When I was a kid, we would have X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. So that's what I want to know. What are your opinions on the bullying momentum that is taking place in this country? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? You can have whatever opinion you would like to have. I'm not going to sit here and try to bias your opinion or tell you that you're wrong. There is no opinion that is wrong. I mean, there are opinions that are wrong. I can't say that. But ultimately, in this situation, I want to encourage all opinions from all students, and then again, go through, make your initial comment, and also what have you seen in your school. So whether you graduated from high school yesterday, obviously not yesterday, but you graduated from high school very recently, and you were in a school where there was or was not some level of bullying prevention done. I want to know about that. Or if you graduated from high school 30 years ago and bullying prevention wasn't even on the radar of the administrators, and just have a discussion about bullying. Long story short, I'm trying to cut this a little bit short because we're almost to an hour. So yeah, just have a discussion on bullying, and I hope if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week. All right, bye everybody.